Hello and welcome back. This is the week 15 lecture. So this is the final lecture of the semester. This is the final week of class, and we are entering the final step of the writing process. So today I want to talk about post-writing. That means everything that we do after we have a completed rough draft. So you really should not be watching this lecture until pretty late in the week. So if you recall, we have rough drafts due on Wednesday of this week, on May 11th. So you will get a little bit of feedback from me on those drafts, but once you've submitted the rough draft, once you are ready to return to it and work with it some more, that means you are entering the final stage, the final phase of the writing process, which, as I've said before, is post-writing. That means revising and editing. So this is, of course, a big chunk of the writing process that many students often skip. As we know, oftentimes after we finish writing, we might feel like we are finished overall. We are ready to submit the paper, the assignment is done, and we're ready to move on. But that's not really the case 9 times out of 10. Like I've been saying, with a paper of this magnitude, a big paper with a lot of sources, a lot of moving parts, you really have to double check things. You need to go back and look over your work. You need to proofread. There will be mistakes that you need to correct. There will be improvements that you need to make. This is, again, part of what we mean when we say writing is a process. You're not finished entirely just because you have a finished draft. Inevitably, as I was saying last week, these rough drafts are going to have a lot of imperfections. They're going to have a lot of mistakes. There might be some citation issues. There might be some sentences that are just unclear. They're not necessarily wrong. They're not necessarily grammatically incorrect. They're just imprecise, unclear, a little bit awkward, not smooth, not easily understandable for your readers. So there's a lot of things that you can do with a rough draft to make it better. There are a lot of improvements and corrections you can make, and even if you just leave a couple of hours for post-writing, it doesn't even have to be a full day, but I would recommend a full day, maybe even a couple of days. But if you can at least devote an hour or two to just doing some basic proofreading, you'll be better off than you would be if you didn't read over the draft at all. And again, with a final draft, with a paper like this, something that we've been working on for so long, I do expect a pretty high level of polish on the final draft because, we've been working for a long time. This is the culmination of all that work. So these final drafts need to look good. They don't have to be perfect. Virtually nothing that anybody writes ever is. But they need to be pretty clean. They need to be clear. They need to be mostly mistake-free. So that's really what week 15 is all about. I understand that many of us are probably still drafting in the early part of week 15, but again, you need to get those rough drafts in by Wednesday. So by late in the week, you can move into revising and editing. And these really are two different things. These terms are sometimes used interchangeably as if they are synonymous, as if they mean the same thing, but they don't mean exactly the same thing. So when we talk about post-writing, these are the two parts of post-writing. Revising comes first. And revising is just sort of a general activity that basically means you are making improvements to your draft. So I'm going to walk you through the different levels of revision. But revision is a little bit different than editing. Now, when you are revising, you might also be doing some editing. That's fairly common. That's fine. I'll explain what that means in a moment. There is some overlap between the two. But revising or revision is really just sort of a general term that we use to talk about making improvements, clarifying, elaborating, or even cutting things that need to be cut. So if we think about the first level of revision, it's really sentence level. We are sticking with individual sentences to begin. So again, you just need to proofread, go back through the draft, read through the draft. Most people read silently. I actually recommend reading out loud, even if you're alone, especially if you're alone. It might seem rather strange, but that's a great way to catch mistakes. It's a great way to catch problems because you'll be able to hear those mistakes and those problems as you read. But if you don't want to do that, a lot of people don't want to do that, at least read it all the way through silently to yourself. And as you do that, you're going to notice typos, obvious errors. But with revision, we're sort of focusing on individual sentences and how they sound. And as we look at that, we'll be able to find all sorts of things, but we're really focused on making sure that our sentences sound good. It's as simple as that. We don't have to make it complicated, right? So sometimes, yes, you're going to find sentences that have some kind of error, like they are not punctuated properly, or maybe it's, it's a run-on, or it's a comma splice. There's something wrong grammatically or mechanically with the sentence. And you can fix those. Sometimes they're easy to fix. Other times you might want to sort of tear that sentence down and build a new one. But you, as the writer, you don't have to get terribly hung up on identifying what each mistake is or being able to explain it to everybody else. You just need to fix this stuff as you find it. So sometimes it will be a mistake that you just need to correct. In other cases, the sentence, like I was saying earlier, the sentence will just sound strange. It won't be clear. Maybe it's your arrangement of words. Maybe it's the order of the words. It's not clear. It's not immediately making sense when you go back and read through. Maybe you just don't like the sound of it. Again, if you're speaking out loud, if you're reading out loud, you can hear what these sentences sound like. And if they sound jarring or if they're sort of difficult to get out, difficult to say, or they're just not clear and they're not clicking and they're not really making strong, decisive claims. Remember, this is an argumentative paper. If your argument's not coming across clearly, oftentimes that's a symptom of unclear sentences, bad sentences. That's a result of bad sentences. So this is the time to start addressing that. So what do the sentences sound like? Are they clear? And does one sort of naturally flow into the next? Now is the time to also think a little bit about transitions. Are you transitioning from sentence to sentence? Later, we can look to see if we are sort of smoothly transitioning from paragraph to paragraph. You don't want things to be too choppy. You want to use some introductory phrases at the beginning of sentences that can serve as links to previous sentences. Or, in some cases, at the end of a sentence, you might offer some kind of connective link to the sentence that's going to come next. So you can play around, you can do different things, you use different phrases, different transitional words. I've included a few of those in this final week's module, but this is part of revision. Sometimes we just need to tweak our sentences a little bit. A lot of people, again, they feel like this means, I have to rewrite all of these awkward sentences or all of these sentences that aren't quite working. I have to tear them down. I have to rewrite them. Maybe not. Hopefully not. A lot of times you don't have to rewrite the entire sentence. You just need to make some kind of change or two, to the sentence. You need to maybe take a word out, change one word to a different word, change the order of words, maybe change a little bit of the structure, how you're introducing the sentence, what kind of punctuation you're going to use in the sentence. You can change all of those things without changing the entire sentence and without changing the idea or the claim or the evidence that you're trying to establish in that sentence. So you're often not necessarily changing the content here, although sometimes you might. A lot of times we're just sort of playing around with our sentences, making them look better, making them sound better, making them flow together better. That's a big part of revision. That's kind of where revision starts on the sentence level. Then we move to part 2 of revision, which is the paragraph level. Kind of makes sense. This is the next step, kind of the next level of the paper once we're done looking at individual sentences. So when you go back a second time, you don't necessarily have to reread the entire paper, but go back to each paragraph that you've written, especially your body paragraph. So by this point, you've already proofed it once, right, to do the sentence level. So now we're at paragraph level. You might want to proof it again, but at the very least, look at your paragraphs, especially the bodies, and let's think about what they look like and what they're doing, okay? Because we might need to revise some of our paragraphs as well. So look at your bodies, okay? Are you establishing and sort of demonstrating clear claims in each one of your bodies? Again, you might spend multiple bodies on certain claims. Other claims might get covered sufficiently in a single body, but just go back through each body and make sure you're accomplishing clear goals. Remember, we've talked about having our paragraphs be unified, which means what we start out doing at the beginning of the paragraph is pretty much what we are doing throughout the entire paragraph. It's what we sort of wrap up by the end of the paragraph, or if we're going to continue to talk about that supporting claim in the next body, we're going to transition into that next body and continue the conversation. So just take a look. You don't have to reread every word, but glance over your bodies and get a feel for just what you're doing in them. This is the time to identify problem bodies. You might find a couple of weak bodies that you didn't have as much to say about that particular claim. You didn't have as much evidence maybe in that particular body. And when you were writing, maybe you didn't notice, or maybe you did notice, but you just wanted to keep going because you had other bodies planned and you wanted to see how much material you end up with. But even if you're on the right side of 7 pages, if you have a really puny, underdeveloped body that's not really doing anything, it's not accomplishing a clear goal, you really have 2 choices, 2 good options. If it makes sense, you might be able to attach that body or sort of that fragment, that piece of what could be a longer body. You could probably hook it on to another body, the paragraph that comes before it, or maybe the body that comes after it. If it's about a related claim or a related sort of thread or idea that you're pursuing, you might be able to combine it with something else. Or you might decide that the paragraph's just not really doing anything and it needs to go. So this brings us to a difficult part of revision, a part that a lot of students don't want to do, which is cutting, eliminating content. This is also a part of revision. So sometimes we are going to add a little bit of content. We might find ourselves writing a few additional sentences to flesh out a paragraph. But then on other occasions, we might have to cut some sentences, or we might have to cut an entire paragraph if we just don't think it's very good, if it's not accomplishing very much. Again, it's your call. If you feel like you can perform some kind of operation on this paragraph and make it better, enhance it, give it what it needs to function well, then go for it. If you have the time, you can do that. But sometimes, especially if we've already met the length requirement and we have a body that's just not cutting it and we don't really know what else we want to say in that body, maybe we just want to get rid of it, as long as it's not going to leave us short of the overall length requirement. Obviously, if you take out a pretty good chunk of content, you're probably going to want to replace it with some new content. So again, we don't want to be writing a whole lot at this point. If your rough draft is in pretty good shape by Wednesday, you really shouldn't have to write very much when you're revising. Maybe a couple of sentences here, maybe cut a couple of sentences over there, but for the most part, we're just trimming, we're making improvements, making a few tweaks. We don't need, hopefully, a lot of wholesale changes, but if our rough draft was a wreck, at least here during the revision stage, we realize we need to go back and draft more, and we still can do that, even though it's a little late, but it's not too late. So we can do that. It's kind of an emergency, the emergency bells, the alarms are going off here. If you're seeing that you're really short on content or a lot of your bodies aren't working, then yeah, you need to maybe get back and produce another draft, a better draft, and then you can ultimately get that ready to submit. So sometimes revision will do that for us, but hopefully revision is a little bit more of a relaxing time. I always like to revise. I actually like to work with a finished draft because to me, a lot of the hard work is done. Now, again, we're making those small improvements to individual sentences and paragraphs. Another thing that you might want to do at the paragraph level is rearrange the order of some of your bodies. Again, you might have them in the right sequence already, but I often find in my own writing that I write in a little bit of an elliptical pattern. I don't always go in a straightforward linear progression. So sometimes I have to rearrange the order of my paragraphs. I don't have to change a lot of the content in those paragraphs. I just decide that like my fifth body should really be my second one or something like that. So you might find that to be true as well. And you don't necessarily have to follow. I mean, you can, if you can do a flashback or something fun with chronology if you want, but you got to figure out what sequence you want for your bodies. You can sort of decide for yourself what that sequence looks like, but this should have been in your outline, but certainly by the time you were drafting, you should have had a sense of the order of the bodies. So now you can double check that. You can look at that and confirm that your bodies are in the right order. They're following a logical, natural progression. They make sense in the order that they're in. So make sure, they're kind of building on each other as you progress. And you can also look for that policy paragraph if you have one. Obviously, double check that as well. So I want to talk about the reverse outline next. This is kind of a separate thing in the way I've presented it in the module, but really it goes right along. It's a separate part of revision, at least the way it looks in the module, but it goes right along with paragraph level revision. It really is what you're doing when you conduct paragraph level revision. It's just one additional thing to write down. So again, I have a tough time selling people on this sometimes, but the reverse outline is very handy. Just hear me out. So we've already done a regular outline, of course, that's the plan that we used when we were drafting, but now we can do a reverse outline as we revise. So as we're looking through our paragraphs, let's decide which paragraphs are keepers and which ones still need some work. So a reverse outline can be very informal. It doesn't have to be, as detailed as some of the outlines that we did before. We're just writing down basically what we're doing in each paragraph of the paper. So pretty basic. So if you get to a paragraph where it's hard to describe it in your reverse outline, and again, you can keep these really brief, like first body, I'm talking about claim X, and I have this piece of evidence, and you can keep it really brief, or you can just organize them by claims. First body, this claim. Second and third bodies, next claim. Fourth body, I'm talking about this other claim. But then if you get down to that fifth body, and it's like, oh, I don't really know what I'm talking about here. I don't have a claim, really, in this body. I don't have any real original material. Okay, I either need to improve the fifth body or I need to get rid of the fifth body. So again, that's what the reverse outline can help us do. It can just help us make decisions about the state of our body paragraphs. Which ones are looking good? which ones are unified, detailed, they have that layer cake structure that we've looked at in my examples, claims, evidence, everything, and then which bodies do I want to go back and work on more, and then which bodies are just really bad and I want to cut them. We might not have bad ones that we want to cut, but at the very least, we're going to have some that need more work. And that really is a big part of revision, identifying those bodies, figuring out how to improve them, and then doing it. So it could be any number of things. You sort of have to figure that part out for yourself. But do a reverse outline. Do it really quickly. And of course, also look at the other paragraphs as well. The intro paragraph, the definition paragraph. Again, if you have a policy paragraph, it should probably be like your last body, or at least near the end of your bodies. So you can certainly give it its own time if it's a separate paragraph. If it's built into other bodies, obviously just check for it there. And if it's built into your conclusion, you can look for it when you're reviewing that concluding paragraph. But when you're doing the reverse outline, you should jot down something for every paragraph, not just the bodies. Start at the beginning, right? Do the intro, definition, all the bodies, and the conclusion. And again, you can look at my outline or your own outline to double check your original outline to make sure that you're doing all the things that are required, particularly, with paragraphs like the intro and conclusion. They're very formulaic, right? There's certain formulas, certain things you have to include, the thesis, introduce your topic, establish basic facts. So just check those off the list using my outline or your earlier outline. So the reverse outline might just take you 5 minutes, but it's a good way to do some of this paragraph level revision. All right, and then finally, the last part of revision is just sort of what we call big picture revision. So remember to focus on your argument, and once you've gone through your draft a couple of times, looking at sentences and paragraphs, you can really just think about your argument as a whole. How is it working? All right, how does it play out over the course of your essay? Do you feel like you're making strong claims? Do you have enough evidence? Do you feel like your credibility is pretty good? Just make some overall assessments of your argument. Do you feel like it's working? Do you need a little bit more? Do you have a couple of claims that you might not feel great about? Again, it's not too late to replace some ineffective content with a little bit of new, better content. So if you need to do that, now is the time. So just ask yourself some big picture questions about your argument, your evidence, and just try to decide if there's anything else, any last minute moves you want to make to bolster or improve, your work. All right, so that's revision. Give yourself some time for revision. Now, if you're on my clock, if you're on my schedule, you have enough time after you revise to step away one more time. So after you revise, you should really feel good about content. Like I said, we are addressing content at times. A lot of times it might be a little more style related. Kind of depends on the state of your draft, but you'll do a little bit of style, sentence structure, how it sounds, and you'll also make sure the content looks good, argument, how well developed. So once you're done revising, you don't really need to make any more, you shouldn't have to make any more major changes to style or content. You have what you need in your draft. And the draft is now pretty close to being a final draft, but you still need to do one more thing, and that is edit. Take some time for editing, okay? This is a little different than revising. It's similar in that you have to go back through your paper and you need to scrutinize individual sentences and look for problems. But editing is a more focused, specific event than revising is. Like I said, revising is kind of a general catch-all term for just making improvements to anything that needs to be improved. You kind of start with style, you end with content. Whereas editing is strictly looking for and fixing mistakes. Okay, that's what editing is for us. So once again, you want to proofread a final time, but now you're not worried about, how the sentences sound. You're not so much worried about, claims, evidence. You're just looking for mistakes. This is the last step. You have what you want. Your paper is good. You're saying what you want. So now you're only focused on punctuation mistakes, spelling errors, capitalization errors, just really minor things that do add up. And they will accumulate in a rough draft of this length. Any paper this long, you're going to have a lot of mistakes because there's a lot of text. It's inevitable, even if you're a pretty careful writer. And again, when we're revising, we are going to catch some of these mistakes, but we're a little bit more focused on other things. So that's why I recommend taking at least a short break between your revising session and your editing session, because you want to be fresh when you sit down to edit. You might even want to edit shortly before submitting. There's nothing wrong with doing this like an hour before the submission deadline. This is the last thing, okay? You don't need a ton of time for it, but you do need one final block of time. Maybe a half hour. Some people can probably edit in like 15 to 20 minutes. I don't know. Everyone's different. Everyone writes differently, edits differently. Everybody's draft is going to be in slightly different shape. So I can't give you one set number. I would just say a half hour would be a safe amount of time to give yourself for the final editing session before you submit. The final part of our writing process. So again, there's a lot of things you're going to identify. Sometimes punctuation problems, and I've tried to correct some of the more common punctuation mistakes on your assignments throughout the semester. So you might want to return to some of your previous work if you have sentence fragments or run-on sentences. These are usually pretty easy things to identify. Now, one thing I have done in the week 15 module, I posted a video that I recorded many semesters ago. It's just sort of a tutorial, I guess. It's just sort of like a little grammar video where I cover grammar and punctuation, common mistakes, and how to fix them. So I recorded it a while back, and I use it really for all my classes. It's not specific to any one class or one assignment. These are just really common mistakes that I see in student work, and I'm telling you how to fix them. So, if you've struggled with sentence level errors, that means, punctuation stuff, incorrect constructions, incorrect capitalizations or anything like that. If you've struggled with those kinds of errors previously this semester, you might want to check out the video. In 101, we do some grammar lessons. I don't really do that in 102, but the video's there, and I can always help you one-on-one. If you have a question, we can talk through email or another video conference. And if I'm seeing major issues with errors, sentence level errors on your rough draft, I will try to at least call attention to them. I'm not going to correct every error, though. And that is one good thing to remember. I am not your editor. I will be reviewing your drafts and giving you some general feedback on them once I see them, assuming that I see them on time. This is one of these assignments where I really can't give you feedback if you're late with the submission. But if I receive your rough draft on Wednesday, by the end of the day Wednesday, I'll try to get you feedback no later than Friday of week 15. But again, I'm not going to correct every error. I will just draw your attention to some problems that you need to address yourself when you edit. So I can help a little bit with this. But, a lot of mistakes are pretty easy to catch if you're reading, and especially if you're reading it out loud. You'll also find typos. It's not always grammatical mistakes. Sometimes you just hit the wrong key on your, keyboard. Sometimes you just made an error while typing. And a lot of these happen all the time. You might have typed in the wrong word. but it's a real word, so Microsoft Word didn't underline it as being misspelled, so you didn't go back and change it. But as you go back and read, you realize that you wrote quite instead of quiet, two words that often get confused for one another in writing. So it's stuff like that. Typos, any kinds of mistakes. Obviously, stuff like misspelled words, there's really no excuse for those, because if you're using a word processor, and most of us do, your program's going to tell you that you've misspelled words. You should always be able to catch those mistakes. This is the cleanup stage. We are cleaning up the mistakes that will inevitably occur in a rough draft. You can also do a final formatting check. This is a good time to double check to make sure that you're following all of our formatting rules. Is the entire document double spaced? Are your margins 1 inch on the sides and top and bottom? You might need to go into Word or whatever program you're using, check some of the settings. We want 12 size font, preferably Times New Roman. And of course, don't let me forget, we have to make sure that our citations look good. So I just graded the rhetorical analyses not long before this recording. I finished not long before making this recording. Most of you seem to have a pretty good handle on citations. Just remember, you have to double check your in-text citations in the body of your essay, and then you need to also double check your works cited page and make sure those two levels of citation correspond and match up. So every source that you cite in the body of your essay with an in-text citation, every one of those needs to appear on the works cited page. And conversely, every source that appears on the works cited page, I need to be able to see an in-text citation for it in the body of the paper. You'd be surprised how often these levels are inconsistent, and that's not good. You need consistency between the in-text and the works cited. So as you're proofreading the draft, you need to be looking at the in-text citations as well. Do you have them? Do you have enough of them? A lot of us have them after direct quotes, okay, because we've all kind of internalized, I hope, that quote sandwich structure, which includes the in-text citation. But don't forget, you also need in-text citations after brief summaries of your sources and after paraphrases. So even if you're putting ideas from your sources in your own words, if those ideas, if that data is coming from your sources, you still have to cite it. Not all of us were doing that in the rhetorical analysis. Sometimes we were just providing citations after quotes. That's not going to be good enough. It wasn't good enough really on the rhetorical analysis, and it definitely won't be good enough on the research paper. So yes, you will have a lot of in-text citations in your research paper. It's just the way it is. You have 8 sources. It's a research paper. You're going to have a lot of research in there, and when you have research, that means you have in-text citations. But just use some common sense. If you're going to be summarizing one source for 2 or 3 sentences in a particular paragraph, and we don't want to do that too much, but every once in a while, you might have to spend that long just going through some key ideas, whether you're summarizing or paraphrasing, and that's fine. But if you're doing that with the same source for 2 or 3 consecutive sentences, you can wait until the end of that second or third sentence and provide the in-text citation there. Now, if you're jumping back and forth between sources, that's when the number of in-text citations will increase. So if you're paraphrasing Lackey, page 15, in one sentence, and then in the very next sentence, you're going to offer some evidence from Jones on page 149, then yeah, you're going to need an in-text citation for me after the one sentence, and then for Jones after the next sentence, because you're going from one source to the next very rapidly. And I would like to see us be able to do that a little bit. We practice synthesizing for a reason. We want to be somewhat fluid in our treatment of sources, and that means it's good to talk about them together sometimes, maybe even together in the same sentence. So we might even, on occasion, be writing in-text citations with two sources cited inside the parentheses. Remember, I showed you guys how to do that. If you're going to do Lackey 14 and Jones 59, we can go together in the parentheses. It's just Lackey page number followed by a semicolon and then Jones page number, assuming you have authors and page numbers for both. So we can share the in-text citation if you're talking about both Lackey and Jones in the same sentence, in the same paraphrase, in the same brief summary. That's fine. But like I said weeks ago, in the research paper, we don't really have time to just dwell on one source for a really long time in our body paragraphs. Just remember that. You don't want to be too reliant on any one source. You don't want to spend multiple bodies just talking about one source. That's going to seem like you're just kind of cribbing your paper from that source. It's okay to use some more than others, and it's certainly okay to use some sources multiple times, but you don't want it to feel like half the paper is coming from Jones, right? Now it feels like Jones's paper. You want a balance. You want to be using all of your sources at least a little bit. So sometimes we will be jumping from one to the next. And then, like I said, you'll need an in-text citation for the first source and then the next source that you get to. But if you're just talking about Lackey for 2 or 3 sentences, you can wait until you're done with that, provide the in-text citation, and then you move on. Okay, so use your good judgment, but err on the side of caution. If in doubt, do I need an in-text citation here or do I not? If in doubt, it's usually safer to just put one, okay? Even if you don't necessarily need it, better to have an unnecessary one than to not have one where you absolutely do need it. Okay, so remember, in-text citations are critical. We can't live without them on this paper. I cannot grade your final draft if you don't have in-text citations. So that's not something we can forget. And again, if you ignored my advice and did not put them into your rough draft, you must do them as you revise. It's absolutely essential. So once you double check those in-text citations, and like I said, part one of checking the in-text citations is just making sure you have them and making sure you have enough of them. Part two, or B, is making sure they're done correctly. Okay, so double check them using my examples, or if you found some good examples online, just make sure yours are formatted right. Remember, we don't usually need a lot of info inside the parentheses. So if you have an author and you have a page number, that's it. Last name of author and page number. No punctuation required, no additional words, no additional symbols. That's all you need. If you don't have an author, you can use an abbreviated version of the source's title. And if you don't have a page number, fine. If you can provide paragraph numbers, that would be great. If it's not convenient or if it's not possible to provide paragraph numbers, just don't worry about numbers. Okay? So generally speaking, in-text citations are easy to do. If you're conducting interviews, you would just put the last name of the person being interviewed, the person you are quoting or summarizing. You just put their last name in the parentheses. There's obviously no page number in that case. So they're not hard to do, and as you're revising, you're probably going to notice at least 1 or 2 spots where you're missing in-text citations. So you can add any last-minute necessary citations here before you submit. And then take a look at your works cited page. Okay, do you have all 8 of your sources on there? Especially if you were doing some last-minute research, y'all. You got to remember, if you found a last-minute addition to your sources, maybe it's not on your works cited page yet. Okay, and just again, double check as you're reading through your draft. kind of keep it in mind, all the authors that you see cited in in-text citations, all the sources that you have in-text citations for, and then check to make sure that all of those sources appear on the works cited page, because I will be doing that. It's not always an exact science, but I will try to match up the sources I see in the in-text citations with what I see on the works cited page, because like I said, consistency between the two levels of citation does matter. If you look like you've been really sloppy in your research and you're not accurately documenting your sources, that's a problem. That indicates that your research isn't where it needs to be. That's going to undermine your credibility. That's going to hurt your argument. That becomes a problem for the paper. So this stuff does matter. Attention to detail matters. That's why, again, you need to set aside some time after drafting to do all of this. You're not going to catch all of this during the drafting stage. All right. So double check all your citations, both the in-text level and the works cited page. Make sure everything looks good, the formatting looks good, and then you submit. So that's it. If you guys have any questions, let me know. And please look for my feedback on your rough drafts, like I said, soon. I'll get them at midnight on Wednesday. I'll start looking at them the very next day. This is a big class, though. I might not be able to get through all the drafts in one day, but I can get through them in 2 days. So you should get your rough draft back with my feedback either on Thursday or Friday of week 15. And if you don't have anything from me by the end of the day on Friday, the Friday of week 15, get in touch with me, light a fire under me, maybe something went wrong, and I'll make sure to get on it. Okay, but if you have any specific individual questions, just email me. If you want to do another video conference, let me know. That's no problem. I can set those up. And good luck. Just remember, you have a full week after the rough draft comes in before the final draft is due. So the final draft is due, according to what I'm looking at here in the module, May 18th. That is the Wednesday of exam week. If you need an extension for whatever reason, get in touch with me before the due date and we might be able to work something out. If you ask me after the due date, I won't be able to help. Okay? And just remember, I'm still here to help. It's not too late. Just let me know if you need anything. And if you don't need anything, I wish you luck. Have a great summer break. I enjoyed working with you guys this semester, and I hope to see some of you at least in future classes. Okay, bye.